Thanks again for coming. Everyone excited? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Jonah, who's going to introduce the panel and get the show going.
Thanks, Jonah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonah Jenkins. I work for Rosetta Stone as a Scrum Master and Program Manager. I'm going to just introduce the panel. Shane Colledge from Akamai. Ankur Gupta from PTC. Melancon from cPrime. Reena Reddy from Harvard Business School. Spilken from Adaptivist. Michael Neer. Where are you from?
I'm down the road in Brookline. I was just reading their creative management, said I got to get the $100 bottom line. I'm here.
Michael from Brookline.
And Jeremy Stark.
Yay!
All right, so we gave some questions to the panel before this meetup. I'm going to go through some of those questions, not in any particular order, so it's going to be a surprise. But I would ask the panel to be brief when you can, be respectful of the other speakers, and also we want to get the chance to the audience to ask some questions. So what I'm going to do is ask a question, and whoever wants to speak up first is welcome. And I'm going to try and do this in 15-minute increments so that we can give a chance for the audience to respond after. The first question is, how does your organization engage leadership in managing epics and stories from prioritization through progress monitoring and completion? Anybody want to go first?
Adaptivist is relatively flat as an organization, which has its pros and cons. So in the products department, we let our tech guys really take the lead there. We see what can be done. And when they interact with the product lead, there's a conversation. It's not just the product lead, his name is Yari, he's a super cool guy. He's not going, no, you better probably straighten up and do what I said. He's gonna listen to what our experts say, and he'll be like, oh, that's a good idea. What do you think about this? And they will take that, and there'll be a conversation, and that will inform the roadmap going forward.
And are you using points? Are you using points for this discussion, or are you using t-shirt sizes for discussing when it might be done?
It depends on the product. And oftentimes, so my team, I'm in the Learn team, we are an online learning platform. We use points, right? I think most of the product teams at Adaptivist use points, but I don't think that conversation happens with Yari. The conversation with Yari is, we can reasonably be done by X. Because he trusts the product leads to know when they're going to know their own capacity and understand what they're capable of. And he listens and he goes with that. If there's a push, if something needs to change, that conversation will come then and we'll adjust as necessary.
And how do you track those deliverable dates? How do you
you track those things? No,
in some software on a Gantt chart.
Oh yeah. The Learn team uses Jira Portfolio, and other teams do it other ways. Like I can't speak for the script runner team because they swore me to secrecy.
Nice. Anybody else want to contribute?
I can.
Go ahead.
So at Harvard Business School, we have a 5-year roadmap sort of a thing that is developed at the executive level. And we have a pseudo yearly process, which is a little bit more formal, where we get approval for things that we can implement. They are not at t-shirt level, but they do have small, medium, large, extra large kind of indication and terminology associated with them. So we do order of magnitude estimations with them, and they're then broken down into epics, actually projects, and then epics and feature stories, and so on. So And at a lower level, at a project implementation level, is where we come in and do story pointings and all kinds of estimations. Depends on the teams and the project managers that are involved as well on what are the techniques used for estimations.
And is anybody using daily Scrum to determine size changes? Are we, is communication happening with leadership down and up?
Yes, yes, there is. So we have daily scrums, obviously, to make sure that we're keeping it on track with our estimations and at the sprint expectations match our sprint expectations. On a weekly level, we have a working group that we report out to, and that also helps us in resolution of issues and so on. On a bi-weekly or monthly level, we have steering group levels where we report up the progress based on the releases that are scheduled out. So when we start out with the Sprint Zero planning, we mostly do the release planning as well for the first release and the further releases. Coordination happens at team level, department, sometimes school level too, because higher ed has other schools that we will have to partner as well. Based on that, the reporting go up to Harvard University level.
And how does that work with every tub on its own bottom?
It doesn't work that well. It's not very efficient. Depends on who you're interacting with, which team, and how willing they are to accept the change. Some of them are, they just are forced to do it, mandatory changes. Some of them are more up to the users, and those are not very easily accepted from a transition standpoint, and change management is very hard. So.
Understood, yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I know in an organization, I think, how does your organization engage leadership? To me, talks about transparency.
Yeah.
Obviously, most people here know that I love portfolio, and working in an organization and rolling it out, an organization that had hardware and software, a lot of dependencies, the real need for kind of a transparent view, but wanting, an overall 12-month roadmap while still maintaining an agile methodology on the engineering side, kind of took bits and pieces from different methodologies and created a process which I thought worked well. They used a rolling wave plan. They would, using portfolio, they would, it started kind of by taking a look at what we were currently doing, and a big part of it was writing effective epics. At the time, epics were fragmented because, as you probably know, Jira, you create an epic in a particular project, but that kind of, you have to get a piece from this project and a piece of that versus writing an epic based on value and problem solving. And so, that was a big, I think, success when we kind of realized that, if we were to use, a template, an epic brief, and write epics based on this is the problem I'm trying to solve, this is the value, this is the outcome. And we started by creating a project where we kind of pulled all of the epics, where we could write them based on that, just based on, what we were trying to accomplish instead of trying to piece it together. Then we were able to kind of swag epics. And the rolling wave plan really was, epics were a high-level swag that went down in the 12-month mark. We started using meta stories, which were, when you think about epics and they're rolling up to the middle of the year, you want to break those into features, or high-level, even meta stories were, groups of features that you might need from each team. And then the team would come in and say, if we just had to work on these 3 features based on our velocity, it would take us this amount of time, throw that swag on there. And then, when it started rolling up to maybe the 3-month mark, the teams would kind of break it into stories and it was business as usual. But that gave, executives that roadmap view that they were looking for, but still allowed you to be agile. There was a lot of business agility where you could, move things out or, cut low-hanging fruit or whatnot. And I think that approach worked well. And I think, when you're talking about, like you said, working with executives, they want transparency. They just want to see that, and it's hard when you're trying to build all this from an engineering side, but they really just want to see something, see when they're going to get their deliverable, and so that was a solution that we used well.
Very cool, yeah. I think the challenge can be keeping track of the stories within Jira, within epics, if you're using scaled agile within a PI, but that's not how the work happens all the time.
Right.
and definitely across teams. We have to worry about projects in Jira and what maybe a team doesn't map exactly to a project or vice versa.
A part of that is, you can't take the people out of the equation. Part of the maintenance of the rolling wave plan was you have the epic when it's, it's down there, it's an idea with this high level swag on it. If it stays in place and it's rolling up, that takes not necessarily big run planning. It could take a safe approach depending on how big the organization or enterprise was. But, just from an agile standpoint, you have to get people in a room. And when what we did was writing these epics was a scope kind of analysis. If we're going to complete this, what features are we going to need from what team? And really break it out that way and say, we're going to need X, Y, and Z from this team, and these features from that team, and put it out there. And those individual scope identifiers became meta stories, and those kind of broke down. So you have to get people in a room. You can't, the tool isn't going to solve the problem. It really is a tag team effort. You have to definitely, get people in to talk about how they're going to break these things down, and have key stakeholders in there who can speak to, how they're going to actually break those down.
So thinking of the way the communication happens, like I said, sometimes waterfall, sometimes agile. Regardless, you're talking to high-level leadership. It goes down through the teams. When the information comes back up, let's say from QA says, we built this thing, there's all these problems with it, you need to find a way. How does the process adjust to accommodate that, or does it adjust? Do we then sometimes have to think about another epic? Do we think about fallout? Do we have a separate epic for bugs?
Well, if you have epics and there's multiple features on it, and in this approach, you have the you're trying to come to a desired outcome with the epic, a problem that you're trying to solve, some value you're trying to create, and that might encompass a bunch of features that when you get going, you realize maybe they phase out, right? Or maybe you just don't have time. These things that are more important, higher priority. There's nothing that's saying you can't move those additional low-hanging features to another epic that's, again, down the 12-month roadmap. It's agility, business agility. You're able to actually, just take the stuff that is, built well, tested, and deliver that, and the rest of it, you can move back.
All right. Anybody else want to contribute to this one?
I'll just add one thing. First of all, everything that Michelle just said. But additionally, that epic layer is really important because it creates the edge on the scope for the deliverable, and you've likely got multiple deliverables moving through the organization that have demands on the same teams.
Exactly.
And so by being able to use the epic layer to create a container for the scope that they're working against, you can then run metrics against all of the deliverables that you have that are rolling up through these teams and understand where the focus for those teams are. And you can prioritize the deliverables to hit the ones that are critical and necessarily pull away from the ones that might be less critical. And those are the kinds of conversations you want to be having as early as possible in a project cycle. And so using that epic layer to understand what the data set is you're working with, and in particular, looking at epics that haven't hit the teams yet, that are empty, and understanding how those teams are likely to decompose those epics into stories so you can get a sense of future scope you're likely to see. Because that's one of the weaknesses of Agile is that it doesn't tell you the work that you're about to create, 3 sprints from now. So everything she said, plus you're probably doing that across 6 different projects. And if you don't have that epic layer in there to create that container for scope by project, you're going to get lost at the team level, and you're going to be doing a lot of running around dependency negotiation.
And I would just, I think I turned my mic off. I would add to everything Michelle just said, Jeremy said as well, that visibility, when you start breaking it across multiple teams or like when an epic spans multiple teams, visibility for that can be tricky.
Yes.
And you really have to make sure that you are diving in further to not overcommit your teams, as well as make sure that you can hit your marks.
Not to go down a rabbit hole, but just to add that one of the other bonuses of having epics in an individual project, one thing that I've always found is that organizations have a tendency to have everything in progress at the same time. The whole roadmap's in progress. And so nothing really gets pushed out. So you have to somehow create some sort of focus on the highest priority thing. And in Jira with epics, there really is there's no way to manage focus. So if you have a single project, you can create just a simple Kanban board that goes through, a process that says, you create quick filters for each of your teams, and you can be like, okay, set WIMP limits, and kind of gauge, how much can this team actually work on and still push stuff out the door. When you're talking about revenue and customer feedback, if you're spread too thin, nothing's getting out the door, you're not getting any feedback, you're not getting any money, and if you're able to find a place where you can actually take a look and analyze, the focus of what the teams are working on, prioritize epics, reprioritize epics, and actually see, is there a bottleneck and in progress? Are the teams working on too much stuff, And that just gives that additional view as to, what's going on with the work they have.
Yeah, I find that we get requests from many different sort of internal customers. They want different artifacts. They want to look at what's happening in the program that's being managed. They want to know, well, what's happening with my stuff? And like you said about epics, if they span different projects or different teams, what happens when those stories get moved off of that epic into another one? Okay, well, that's good to know, maybe at the local team level, or maybe the Scrum Master did that, or somebody did it, but how do we communicate about that?
Yeah, I don't think that, the way, I love Atlassian products, I love Jira, but I don't think that the way epics are organized provides any sort of visibility into, those big pieces of work.
Yeah, we end up putting a lot of different kinds of Confluence pages together to represent that data.
Yeah, for sure.
The next level of that is what happens when fixed dates are imposed and you need to change the scope of what the deliverables
I think that they're always fixing. I don't think we'll ever get away from fixing.
Yeah, I mean, fixed dates are a thing. You can't get rid of them, Marketing has to market something, and they need a date that's going to come out, right? But when that date is approaching, and that it's not going to be the exact thing that everybody committed to, how do we as organizations communicate about that internally, maybe not externally?
Well, I want to jump on that one.
Go for it.
Because I love fixed dates.
Yeah.
Because it turns the conversation to scope.
Yeah.
If you want it by a certain date, then the only thing we're talking about is the scope and the capacity of teams to deliver on that scope. So I prefer fixed dates over the sort of argument that it's done when it's done.
Yeah.
But
It's never done.
if we frame the question the way you did, you've already lost. Because if you're talking about what the date's going to be after the project started, you missed a step. Which is first to understand what the epics are, to get that epic swag layer, so you understand the teams you need to talk to, the kinds of technology you're going to be working with, and the general scope and understanding of what you're trying to deliver at the epic level. Basically, I describe the epic layer as the kinds of things we need to do in order to get something big done. So then you know who to involve in a conversation about timelines, right? And you have them look at the work. You can potentially provide some charts and graphs and math for them to help understand what they're likely to be able to deliver. And you can negotiate a date. Then you can fix the date. Then you use the same process that you use to scope that work week after week to understand if you're tracking against the expectations that you set. And if you're learning something week after week that's making the project harder, then you have to go to management very early in the cycle and say, we're unlikely to hit our target given what we're seeing. So then they can de-scope, they can make decisions. Because the last thing you want to do is be doing this 2 weeks before you're supposed to deliver. So one of the things I try to communicate to organizations is you want to respond to signals, not pain. And a lot of organizations only respond to pain. But the only way you get signals is to understand the data you're working with, which is why you need the data sets and the epic layers and the right tools inside of Jira. And if you look at Jira, it's coming from a very project-centric, very waterfall background, and that legacy really hurts it in the Agile space. But there's a lot of tools now that are sort of mitigating that, but it's not totally there yet. And a lot of the understanding about how to use those tools isn't widely understood. So from my perspective, I love fixed dates, talk about scope, talk about capacity, set a target, and then track very carefully how you're progressing and have those conversations with management if it looks like you're going to miss, but very early.
And if a fixed date is like end of Q1, end of Q2, does that work for you, or do you prefer something that's more exact and it's not necessarily focused on?
I prefer it exact, and I think that that's the Agile method, is to be clear and explicit, right? Because then we know what we're talking about and there's no confusion. Okay.
I always wonder if that date is real.
Yeah.
Frankly,
Well,
I mean, like GDPR. I don't know if you guys have checked your
Yes,
email, but there's
yes,
this GDPR thing,
yes.
and you know what? That's a real date. That is you know what? You don't make this date, you're not operating in the Eurozone. Thanks.
Yep.
That's a real date. But inside a company, when it's work that we're looking to put forward, okay, we say X date, and then it looks like X date's not happening, then it's time for that conversation. Because that date, though it's a real date, it's kind of a real date. It's sort of it's a thing. But it doesn't have to be the end all to end all, and no one's going to be unreasonably flexible. Because you can go, as Jeremy said, you can look at the scope. Okay, well, I mean, it's not going to happen, so yeah, we're going to do this instead. You okay with that? And then they might say, yeah, you know what, let's push it back a little while. We'll be okay. The new date is this. Real dates is what I was getting at there.
Or D-Flash.
Yeah.
I've actually, I battled this for years and years and years, the whole fixed end date thing, and I've finally given up. I think like the dirty little secret is that you can have a fixed end date, but no one's saying that you have to say what you're going to deliver on that date. That's it.
Well, that's what happens.
And I always use Apple as an analogy. They'll tell you when the new iPhone's coming up, but you don't know what features you're getting until like the very end. Like there's no reason why you can't push forward. Okay, you want to release on a specific date, but that still allows you to kind of do your what ifs and release what's tested and what's ready to be released.
But Ankur, you deal with outside forces. Is there an internal date and an external date?
There's always
Always.
hidden dates and unhidden dates and
Secret dates.
secret dates and what's a real date versus fake dates. But I like what Jeremy said. But at the same time, there are, I think, two factors from my perspective which are at play. And the most important factor is where is the company or the group or the teams in terms of their agile adoption journey. And some teams are really good and they adopt it quicker. It's just the culture of the team, and the culture around that team. And some teams are not that good and they'll take forever. So it's very analogous to that, how dates change. And I've seen it in a bunch of our projects where, sometimes where there's a real date, like a real date where, one of my program managers is here and I'm going to flash one of his dashboards later. And he is dealing with a real date, which our company's future depends on that date. And that's a real date.
But do they say what features they're delivering on?
And that's what. And then these features are defined by the compliance need of SEC. So, but then there's, how we implement them is where the play is. So agile culture of teams, features, and then what is also really interesting is how one uses Jira for that. And Michelle, you pointed out, Jira is not very good with sort of feature level. It's sort of, that is where the secret sauce is always in most agile teams. It's what is the feature level. And I think you can fudge around Jira and do that. There are various ways to do it. They're not real, and that's a good area where maybe someone want to invest in a product and overlay. But because in a good agile journey, a feature is where it's all at. And how you define and deliver this feature. So that is, but it can be fixed from a Jira perspective. The problem, and that brings to my last and fourth point, is the people. Do people understand features? Do they really understand the process which flows in the features? And I'm facing some of the challenges in another program of mine where some of our teams don't understand the process.
On the team level?
On the team level. So the features they'll write are defunct features. And that
Do you think that's a problem? I feel like when we're talking about people, when you're talking about breaking things down and having those conversations where you're saying, this is what we're doing, this problem that we're solving, I think that comes into play when you're, trying to talk about epics and how you're going to break them down into features and whatnot, instead of kind of just stories flowing into, and I've seen some organizations where stories are actually created and then pushed up to the organizational level, which is so backwards to me.
So what I want to end this is, where Jira is like surpasses any other tool in the industry right now is, and even when we see the version 1 reports and all that, is the basic tenet of Agile said unsaid is transparency. I think if there's one thing which will always remain, then Agile becomes something else in future, which it will. Is this concept of transparency. And what Jira does very effectively is provide the transparency and have folks have a conversation about that transparency.
Yes.
And you can send a link to someone, to CIOs of the organization or whatever, and have a conversation. It's so easy. So
That's right. So just want to open up to questions here. We have more questions for the panel, but anybody have questions for this segment? Go for it.
Sure. How do you group your epics so that it's more, that they tie into a higher level strategy? How do you manage that?
You have to, when you're talking about a portfolio level, yeah, I mean, portfolio or some other, portfolio planning, because in Jira, you can create different issue types, but you're not going to get past that epic level, right? So if you want to have, you can still have, links, but, if you want to have that hierarchy, that roll up. Yeah.
So do you use initiatives or do you use
Initiative,
themes?
yeah,
or-
usually it's like, epics, initiatives, programs, themes, or something to that,
Sure.
yeah, and it really just depends on, for me, I feel like when you're talking to executives, they have an idea of what that big piece of deliverable is and why it's important.
I mean,
I'll give you the cheap,
Yeah.
out of the box Jira answer to how to do that. You create an issue type called a delivery
Yep.
or a program increment, whatever you want.
Yep.
You create a new link type called includes, and you include the epics in that new issue type. And that way you have a deterministic way to create that data set. And because you use the includes link type, not relates to or whatever, you create something that's specific to indicate that this epic is included in this particular deliverable. Create a new project, call it something like roadmap, and create those deliveries or program increments in that roadmap, and now you can prioritize those, run them through a Kanban swim lane, and these will take potentially months to complete,
Yeah.
but you understand what's going on, and then you can get to the epics right in there, and then you can get to the stories from there.
That's a great way to.
And if you install something like structure, you can have the query pull all that data out and drop it right on the screen.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, I'll give it even a cheaper version.
I love cheap.
Because it's structure and all that, right? So I've not done that PTC, but I've done that before. Simple label types, and then do queries on label types.
Yeah, I
Don't use
Anchors.
labels. Don't use labels.
I got don't use labels.
It's hard, but to get started, to get conversations
Yep.
going, to
Yep.
have a roadmap.
Sure.
Because if you've not done any of that, at least to get something visual, that is, if you're starting at 0, that's the way to go. And when we reach 40, 50, and you want to go 80 miles per hour, that's where Jeremy's.
Certainly, sir, whatever works.
But that's a great point, because I think, if you're even thinking about, having a portfolio plan or whatever, that acceptance process, like you can go through the acceptance process, create fields that have, we can't move until this next phase until we get this amount of data and so on and so forth. And when it gets to accepted, it becomes whatever plan that you want to kind of report on.
Right.
And for quick and dirty visualization, you can do what Jeremy said and then put things on an Agile board. You can have a completely
Yep.
unrelated Agile board with your initiatives or with those, or with just your epics. Just put all the epics on a board and then good luck.
Let me plug another product. Script Runner is great for spreading out all of those stories down the tree, starting with the delivery to the epics. They'll get it all on one board.
And I don't want to pile on too much more with that, but another one of our products, we've partnered with SmartDraw. Script Runner and SmartDraw. SmartDraw has this thing called SmartDraw Object Notifications, right? You can point Script Runner at SmartDraw and say, look at this data set and give me a picture. And now that's what you get. You get a complete visualization of everything by our products. Anyway, what were you doing before?
Today,
Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah? Hey, Sarah?
Yes.
Sarah, I was able to read it from that
Yeah,
far
sorry.
away.
Yeah,
Good.
just,
I don't believe
stuck
it.
to
I
my
used to
hair.
wear glasses. Now I'm healed.
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle. I've been drinking water from this lake.
Somehow I doubted that.
Yeah. So first of all, Shane, you and I are going to do some tap dancing later on because the last
Interpretive
one,
dance.
interpretive dance,
Yeah.
because so I want to take this minute just to, anyways. So Sarah, that's a great question,
Thank
and you're very welcome. Where are you from? Not from like Boston area, but where do you work at?
I work at Ed Software.
Okay. And I think I heard a lot of answers about the tool. Was your question about how do you make it happen in the tool, or was your question more holistic, kind of?
It was a little bit of both. So it was more the holistic, but I was excited to learn about the tools as well, because that's really the practical. We have a decent way of doing it from the holistic approach, so hearing it from the practical tool approach was great, but I'm always interested to hear how
Right.
other people are doing it, managing it.
So how many people in dev, how many people in product development in general, like that you have? And
350?
wow, okay. That's like 3.5 trained, I'm thinking, scaled agile.
Yeah.
So I want to offer a different perspective, and maybe then Chen, you can jump in as well, because we're last two that, after we just rambling on. So I think from a tool perspective, I would not add to what was said. I think it's all very great ideas. I'm actually going with a client in Indianapolis, big healthcare client, and we're creating this structure, and they're using a different tool, which is not Jira. Oh, that's fine. Which I don't like. By the way, I'm like a management consultant. I'm a totally tool agnostic. So I was doing work with cPrime, constant contact here and a half. Hi, Liza. Great to have you here. And they use Jira. And then I said, well, that's fine. I used to live in Israel for a lot of years, and I had my employed people who were PMO members at Philips Healthcare, and they were doing version 1 Rally. And at the time I was like, okay, it's version 1 Rally, and I seen Jira. Now that client, they're managed by their big corporate to use CA Agile. And I'll have to say I'm agnostic, and yet I think Jira is much better than CA Agile. I would say that, and it's not just because Greg invited me here. It really is. And one of the things they're trying to create, they're totally new to Agile. They have a cross-distributed team in India, all over the US, some in Europe. And I think what happened to us when we adopted Agile, and we thought, hey, Agile is cool, it's really nice, and we fired all those business analysts. All those business analysts there that were doing COBOL development, by the way, for green screen system, healthcare, insurance. Still happens. People still work there. 20-year-old customer reps, they'll sit in front of a computer, I guess as old as your son right here. And you'll put them in front of a computer and they'll say, okay, where's the mouse? And so there's no mouse. You have to learn 100 different strings to move from screen to screen. It still happens. People still work that way. And the question is, how do you create in an agile environment where it's completely forgotten that actually requirement management was ever a thing, and there were critical design review, the design reviews, how do you move now to this top, like forward, they use that word, requirement management, right? We're kind of reteaching ourselves. We started, the user story, that's great. So what's the next layer up? Oh, there's a feature, and then the next layer up is actually, we need to relearn the structure of top-down requirement management, and we put ourselves in this, we call it about the rabbit hole. It's like we've completely forgotten that we've been working on it for 60, 70 years, and this knowledge exists. We don't need to reinvent this knowledge. We know that there used to be these big things, they went down to smaller things, and then really small things, and Agile works awesome, it's great. But someone here, I think Jeremy said before, or Adaptivist.
You can call me that.
Yeah, Adaptivist, because of your great t-shirt, dazzling t-shirt. I think it's back to asking ourselves, okay, user studies fine, but what's of the bigger approach? How do we create this forward requirement traceability, which is not where we shouldn't be using at all, structure? It's all boils down to that, and that's a bigger discussion on how we're going to match it in the tool. Let's figure out the strategic intent of how it should be managed, and then figure out whatever tool we want to use.
That's very similar to what I was going to say. You stole it.
I'm sorry. We can still do the tangle.
I think the tooling is not like Michael said. Tooling is not the first question to ask, and how you step in and solve these types of problems, how you group epics. It really begs the question of how are you thinking about the work, and I like what Michelle said about the based on the problems you're trying to solve.
Yes.
And if you can have that type of discipline, you can make any tooling fit that. And so it's so easy to bash on, well, the tool doesn't do what we want. Well, no, you need to back up and decide what you're trying to do. And so we have a similarly cheap solution where for the project I'm working on, we have an overlay project where that's sort of the common source of truth, or the single source of truth where everything rolls up to, and we're managing things that way. And I fully recognize that that's a clunky way of working, and I'm trying to work toward a better way to do it. But it's a matter of, that's the least bad solution I can find to get the people to get our teams to work in that direction. And hopefully over time, as the change management happens and people are used to that and they see, hey, this isn't just a bunch of project management gibberish, but it actually brings benefits, then we can start to introduce, all right, well then, which parts of this hurt you? Well, this and this and this. It's funny, that hurts everybody too. Well, let's start to work how we can unify these workflows and bring things together to one layer instead of having multiple ways of working. But it starts with the people and with the process, and then you adapt the tooling to it, I think. Otherwise, you get really frustrated.
Show us where the software touched you.
Oh gosh.
So the question there is alignment of cultures. Sometimes even within an organization, we have many different cultures that are probably flourishing in their own ways, but sometimes we need to bring them together. Sometimes it's through the tools. Sometimes it's through something overarching like Scaled Agile or something like that. But what are some ways that we can not just bridge those cultures, person to person, but also when people are using different kinds of tools? If someone's using something that's not integrated into the Atlassian suite, how do we get them to understand what's necessary and what's possible?
Okay, I mean this is like my little soapbox. It's
Cool.
just
Go for it.
it is not. It shouldn't be that hard, right? And Jira, look, you boo if you want. Just link it in Jira. Just link it in Jira. Make sure that everyone has the resource they need, right? It's not a contest,
Right.
because I'm going to win anyway. And so what it comes down to is make sure that everyone is communicating about the work in an efficient manner, and make sure they can get to what the hell they need to get it done.
Yeah.
And just link it in the Jira issue. The people who are using Jira are going to find what they need on the relative issue, and the people who aren't using Jira will go about their happy way in SharePoint. Have a nice day with that.
Can I get into
But-
both with you?
yeah.
I feel the same way. It's just, I feel like, a lot, when you think about Jira and the tooling, regardless of the tools, it should be just a reflection of what's going on in the organization outside of the tooling, right? So, I feel like all of the stuff that, you have issues, and if a team wants to go off and use some other tool, I mean, I think that's an organizational issue in my part, because I feel like, the team should be working together for their goals, and then, what they've talked about, what they've planned, what they've broken down, what they've estimated is created in Jira as a representation of what's already happened. So I feel like there's an over dependency on the tools from executives and higher ups that say, the tool is the process, and it comes down to getting away from that. And for me, I feel like if a team's going off and using their own tool, then that's a management issue. Like if the organization has decided they're going to use Jira and try to keep it simple, and it's a place where everybody can go and link their stuff and have a transparent place to work and collaborate and see dependencies and so on and so forth, then that should be what they're doing. If a team goes off and goes rogue and uses something else and then demands an integration, that's a management decision.
I was imagining a situation where parts of the company have not yet adopted Jira, and you want to bring them on board. So obviously that's where your answer comes in.
I think some things, a lot of times, Salesforce comes into play, and I've actually integrated Salesforce, and I think those are two wholly different tools,
Sure.
right? And so, you talk about, I always use business justification when, they're saying, we need this field or that field or whatever, it's like, why can't we use what we already have? Just to make them kind of explain to me why they need it, not just because they want it, And I think, in some cases, there are needs for integrations. There are some things that Jira doesn't do, as much as this whole panel, we think it's awesome, but, for example, if you're trying to report on, we're going through an Agile transformation, there's no way to really, as much as you don't want to be big brother, executives want to see how the transformation's going, there's really no way, and I love this about Atlassian, to kind of show all of sprint data in one place. You can't export it, you can't really show it in a single dashboard. I love that about them, because they're not gonna, it's for the teams. That information is for the teams for continuous improvement. So they've made it very hard for executives to kind of police what's going on with the teams. And there are other things that you can kind of integrate with Jira that will do that, you know.
Go ahead.
No, Joel has a question, but structuring the
There's-
EDI or,
Yeah,
sorry.
there are lots of integrations that do that.
yeah, and
Oh, you
Ankur, were you gonna say, you,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
So I hear you about weaponized metrics.
Yes.
But I have to say, as an enterprise agile coach, there's high value in being able to compare patterns of things across teams. And in fact, I just built a dashboard using a combination of all the tools we've been talking about to look at the burn charts of all the teams across the course of the PI. And the minute it got fired up, we found out what was going on process-wise that was invisible otherwise.
I agree. I think that, and that's
Two
one.
teams that didn't match the same pattern.
And that's what I'm
what's
thinking.
going on.
And you want to be able to interject for teams that are struggling. You want to be like, you know, continuously they're struggling. You want to be able to interject. This is one of the things that I think like Notion does it well. I like Notion that you do the
I
same
used
thing
to
with the
work for one of
dashboard.
the other vendors. So.
I think that just metrics are a slippery slope in my personal opinion, but I do agree with you in that sense that
It's,
you know.
I would take that because, like you said, that's a management problem. Yeah, that's a management.
Well, agile. I'm not. And I don't necessarily mean.
Weaponized
I don't
methods
necessarily mean
is
that.
a
I
problem.
just mean, you know, I'm not necessarily saying like other, integrations with tools that report on that. But I'm saying every integration under the sun that's saying we want to go off and use, we want to use, some other issue tracking tool or like some other ticketing system, and we don't want to get into Jira. We want you to integrate our tool with Jira. Was my approach.
Once
So I have sorry to interrupt, I have a little different take on this. I think, a metric or data-driven culture is extremely important to change behavior. And behavior changes the metrics. And that sort of cycle is extremely important. And I'll put up, I promised, I will put up a dashboard like what you said. And on some of the teams, and we have seen when you are constantly projecting that metric out, whether it's management or it's team or it's people who care about it. When you are projecting metrics out, week after week after week, it doesn't take long, just 2-3 months for people to change behavior.
Eventually, they stop arguing about how it's bad data and discover.
And usually, first 2-3 months, they always talk about how your metric is wrong.
Right.
Then they talk about, this doesn't work for us. Then they talk, and then those things will go on. But in the end, if you consistently keep flashing it, because these are very standard agile, like a simple thing like a burn down chart. I'm not even talking anything else. All of us know and have done burn down charts in simple Excel or not even Excel, on stickies on pieces of paper. It has seen, in the last 15 years, I've seen it really change behavior. Simple burn down chart, put it in a place where everyone can see.
I was talking about other issue tracking tools just to be clear, but now that we're talking about metrics, I was involved with a client that actually just came, and I was just really moved by the approach that they took to, instead of metrics. And so Sarah and I were talking about this, where they actually would do a monthly release meeting, but it wasn't necessarily a release. And actually, teams would send representatives. It took about 90 minutes. Every team was on there. Some were remote or whatnot. Did a couple of slides, bring their own metrics. But really what they were saying is, this month, this is what we're working on. This is where we are. This is the problem we're trying to solve. And it was just a meeting that kind of showed the status of where everybody was and what they were struggling with. And, they were allowed to kind of bring their own metrics to represent their continuous improvement.
So I just add something to that from another angle, which is I found it very valuable to try and preserve a lot of the diversity of approach in organizations. And I think the Agile process can stamp that out. And I think metrics can also stamp that out. But yes. You need to recognize that teams are made up of people and they have totally different mindsets and they have different backgrounds and they're coming from different experiences and so forth. And also they're working in different technology sections of the large beast that you're working with. And there might just be different rules that they have to play by in those areas. So for me, when I go into a team, I try to figure out what makes them succeed and what's impeding their success. And I try to understand what metrics matter to that team to make those things visible, like we've been saying, and then start an improvement process there. And I think naturally, when you get into that engagement, you'll start to become more monolithic in the kinds of metrics you're looking at and so forth. But I think you've always got to be willing to listen to the outliers and blow your whole metric system up in order to rediscover what it is they're seeing. And you go through that cycle in the organization, and that way the metrics don't get stale, because people learn the metrics and they can socially game the metrics, right? Agile is very susceptible to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think there's a real value in preserving the diversity and not getting so bent when people aren't doing things the way that you say they should be done, because ultimately the structures that we put in place, the process, the tooling and so forth is to help us succeed. So what I've seen is teams can succeed without being agile. They can succeed being the most curmudgeonly group of people, just awful to work with, but they're just great at what they do. And you have to be able to preserve that in order to succeed as an organization in some
It's the cultures in our companies that make them what they are. I mean, we all can use Agile and use Jira in exactly the same way, and we're not the same companies. And that's, to me, is the big challenge. How do you preserve that and buff that to a high shine so that it does what it's supposed to do while providing the executive views and the metrics, which at the end of the day, you have to have some sort of metrics. And that's the art of this job, is finding that sweet spot and knowing when to zig and zag.
And I think being able to explain, if you're collecting metrics, then there has to really be an understanding of what you're collecting, because there can be an assumption, of numbers from executives and, and this team isn't doing so great because they have a lower velocity, but the consistency is what matters, and I agree, I'm seeing this dashboard behind me, and I think that all of this is very useful for Agile coaches and Scrum Masters that we should be interjecting with teams that are struggling or might need, you can tell that they're not hitting their marks sprint after sprint or not completing what they committed to or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, what's up
That's a
with
tool
Real Madrid?
for an Agile coach.
So I just want to sort of credit a couple of folks from my company who build these, and I'm not, I just coach them a little, and to Jeremy's point, I think folks gain Agile, and I've seen some parts of it already happening. If you're in a 3 to 5 year Agile journey, about a year and a half into it, people start gaming Agile, and because they get it. Folks will game. It's gaming, great. I'm a gamer too. It's like, that's why I love metrics.
Elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, game, that blows my mind. I would just never think that anybody would have the stones to game their work. But I'm very naive.
Thank you for saying
Sorry.
that.
It's again, the beauty of Agile is the conversation. The transparency in conversation. I'm going to go always back to it. So, you look at this, there are like 3 teams here. The team 1, and this is like the actual live day from today. They start the sprint, I think within today or something, right?
Yes, today.
Yeah, and you can see the teams on the left are just sort of marching along day 1. They're starting to work, and then team 3 on the right, WTF, right? What happened? 65% scope change. Either we did not, but it's a conversation starter. What happened? Did you guys not groom well?
Was it him?
No, it was an error.
It was an error.
Tell me how you do sprint planning.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Fun backstory.
But yeah, it's the conversation.
a
Let's talk
conversation.
about this. What happened here?
Right.
And it doesn't have to be like a
Punitive. Right.
what's
It can
going
be.
on? It could be, but that doesn't
Punitive.
get the best out of people.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like that should
Which is
also
fine.
be part and parcel of the sizing. When you're talking about the stories, we talked about this earlier, the number really doesn't matter. It's making sure that we're getting details out of people's brains and into the common knowledge and then disputing and debating if necessary, but making sure that we know enough about the work to get the work done.
Absolutely, and that is and I have a paper which I'm writing on the side of this is how we as a culture have to change our mind around metrics. Typical metrics were written for waterfall thinking. Agile metrics have to be thought from an agile perspective. That is a very different way of thinking. So if we think of metrics from a waterfall mindset, we are always going to be in the command control punitive mindset. But if we have to think of metrics from an agile perspective, it is different. And in companies which are going through an agile transformation, that doesn't even happen for 2-3 years down the road. You have to mature to get there to say, oh, agile metrics are different. We may start talking about it, people will not understand it, there'll be I've done it before, it doesn't work in most company cultures. It's only you're 2+ years or maybe 3 years into an agile journey where you say, this metrics in an agile construct, I get it. CIOs and CEOs and CDOs and CPOs then stop saying, when will I get this thing? They say, what can I get? Right now, most companies are saying, let's stop this train or stop these things when the money runs out. We haven't talked about that at all. We just talk about features and our products, or we don't talk about money. Scaled Agile has a concept of OpEx and CapEx and money also. Most companies don't use that at all. So, that is a whole different factor in metrics, which one has to understand in Agile how it works. Most companies are not adept at it also. So
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the end of that, where I think there is a place for waterfall thinking. And I think an organization should be able to ask, when am I going to see all of these things?
yes.
Because what that does is it moves the conversation forward around the metrics. So if you're going to work in a waterfall way, you need metrics so that you know what you're talking about very early in the project cycle. So when they ask when and what, you can tell them with a high degree of certainty that this and that, right? And then have that conversation. That conversation is continuous. Everything you're saying about dialogue in Agile is right on. Because Agile isn't a process. Agile is really a communication protocol.
Yes.
It's about standing up and talking to each other every day about what's going on so we can make decisions, right? And metrics are very important to inform that when the timelines get stretched out, right? Because we're very bad at understanding how things are going to happen months from now. So I like what you're saying, but I think that I do think there's a place for the waterfall thing. So I want to devalue
Actually,
that.
I love waterfall. If we follow waterfall, believe me.
You're a manager?
The problem is we never, when we did waterfall, we didn't even follow it correctly. If you don't do Agile, we think we mix it. If you do, we went to the moon because of waterfall. Don't remember. We built the Hoover Dam because of waterfall.
I remember.
It was a great day.
So it's like waterfall is not bad or good. It's just that we freaking mix these things and we don't follow any methodology well.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental problem in the industry today. I think is the dichotomy between just-in-time agile learning and the waterfall. We need to hit a date by September because that's when the students return, right? And that I think can be bridged by metrics. That's the only thing that's going to do it, is applying some
Depending
math
on the metrics.
and getting good at process so that you become predictable, and then you can have conversations early looking at the same.
I always say folks were doing Agile even before they knew it in waterfall if they were doing it correctly. So
Correct.
it's a conversation.
Even Guilfoyle was motivated by metrics.
Christopher Columbus himself.
Yes, just to be clear, we had, I think, 5 minutes left, right?
Really?
Go for it. No, go for it. I don't
Jonah, did
see-
you ask us about metrics?
Sorry?
Was it your question about the metrics? Is that how we got there? I love lakes. You love waterfalls. I love lakes. So I was daydreaming, I guess, how we got to metrics.
It's part and parcel of all of the things that we were talking about.
It's a
So
conversation.
I think that, going back to Sarah's question and talking about process versus tool, when we talk about metrics, we have to take a step back, and I really like quoting Jeff Patton's concept about output, outcome, and impact metrics. And I love it so much. I'm going to do a plug for my new book that released last month in A-Press Media, Springer, which is called The Pragmatist Guide to Corporate Lean Strategy. And I love this approach so much that I have a full chapter on it. These tend to be output. And I think one of the things we forget when we think about metrics is asking ourselves, before we put all the metrics out, say, hey, yes, we need a burn down. And I love burn down. I love lakes, burn down, waterfalls. What are we measuring? What are we measuring? Is this good? And maybe it is. But what's the impact we're having out of this transformation? And I don't think we're asking ourselves that question. What is an impact? I know it's constant content, so let's do burn down. And then Mike Adler, then moved to RSA, said, let's do time to value. People says that's very difficult measuring time to value because I'm a dev. I don't care when it goes to QA and I'm done. Why are you telling me it takes 90 days to deliver this freaking feature? Well, because we need to think about a delivery chain. Not about just, oh, I'm done, my story's done, my team's done, I'm done. No, that's not what we're trying to get here. This is not the mindset. The mindset is impact, not output. And I think it's that discussion of what do we want the metrics to achieve.
I think that's interesting, Excel. I'll give you an example of where I think metrics really can play a role in understanding impact. I was on a project, and we determined that one team was going to be way late. And so I got leadership in the room, VP of engineering, and he waved his hand and said a bunch of things that were going to help. And all the teams went back to work, and we came back the next week, and nothing changed in the metrics. And I said, well, why is this? You made a decision, I don't see the impact. And it was because people didn't feel safe changing the priorities based on something that was said in a meeting. They had to go back and deal with stakeholders and so forth. So then the VP went to the stakeholders and drove the decision home, and next week we saw a change in the metrics. So that's 2 weeks to understand that one, the first round didn't have impact, and then it did have impact, and we were going to succeed. And that's a very short cycle as far as I'm concerned when you're dealing with like VP level decisions, but they can really hold the organization accountable for making sure that the decisions that they make have impact at the staff level.
That makes sense.
Michael, where can the fine people find your book?
He's got a table
Let
out
me
front.
turn this on Amazon and on Acrest's website.
Pragmatists.
The Privatization Guide to Corporate Lean Strategy. Thank you for asking.
Last question?
Take it away.
Oh,
Last question. Like for this Agile project, how you feel like a Scrum Master and a product owner, their relationship, like how like you structure the team for the product owner and the
how do teams work between Scrum Master and Product Owner?
yeah.
Have you seen Star Wars? There's this scene where Luke Skywalker gets put into a pit with this monster. And I think of Luke, Rancor, he's a Rancor. And so Luke is the Scrum Master and the Rancor is the product owner. And eventually, one of them is going to die. No, I'm sorry. No, it's not like that. The product owner wants, right? The product owner wants now. The product owner is the customer, right? You want to please your customer. And the Scrum Master is your homeboy who is not going to let the product owner drive your team crazy. And that's kind of how we look at it. The Scrum Master is the protector of the team. The product owner is the marauder. That's
a great question though, because I feel like when you get to the team level in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of confusion that is never addressed, and people just throw around the terminology. And it can be very frustrating for a team because the whole magic of Agile and Scrum specifically is that you want the team to continuously improve, and it actually creates a movement, like a momentum, and they're kind of evolving. But if the teams don't actually understand those roles right out the gate, or understand the different ceremonies, what they mean, how does this matter to me, how is this helping me, then it's just going to create frustration. So the fact that you're asking that is a great question, because I think that can come, we're going to be agile. Our organization is going agile. There's no really, I don't know. I mean, a lot of organizations do take the initiative to, train the teams, but in a lot of cases they'll send 5 people out to become Scrum Masters. They come back and then, that's it, right? So, I think it's important that if you want to start a Scrum team, that everybody understands it. Actually, when you go, if you're an individual, those lucky 5 Scrum Masters, when you initially get exposed to it, you come back and you're revved up. You're like, what are the cubicles? Like, you're so amped, like it's empowering because you're empowering the team, so.
And then reality.
So the fact that the rest of the team is just oblivious to like all of this,
Like a Scrum Master, you don't have any control to the team, right?
Yes.
Well, the Scrum Master's role is not to control the team.
Yeah.
It's to enable the team, right?
Yeah.
And we, as you said, the Scrum Master is there to protect the team from challenges, internal and external.
And misconceptions can just go south, like right away. Like you're just dead and gone because it just takes the whole positivity out of the entire experience.
And there, you can't understate the personal aspect of this. The person who's going to be the Scrum Master has to have some empathy. They have to be like somebody you can, you don't want to necessarily go and tell them all your problems, but they need to be able to pick up that these people are getting stressed out and we're committing to too much. Yo,
It's
hold on a
a specific,
second.
he's right, it's a specific type of person that wouldn't overstep the role in trying to manage.
Yeah, they're not the manager. They're the.
I think it's important for the Scrum Master to be Switzerland within the team,
Yes.
because then you're trusted. And then you can have a conversation with the product owner, which is not tied to any given feature. You're not trying to advocate for a given feature. That's their job to advocate for the features. It's your job to advocate for the people that are going to implement those features.
Product owners are asking for things, a list of things that they want, and prioritizing that list based on customer feedback. And the Scrum Master is helping to keep the wheels turning on the process.
Yeah, they're greasing the wheels. They're not running the show.
Does that answer your question? I don't know if it answers it completely.
No.
Okay. let's talk more afterwards. I think it's a great
He was
tangent.
sitting right next to Nitin. He brought his product owner with him.
He likes waterfalls.
To the.
Sorry for this laugh, but I think I like the personal aspect. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
It's the biggest part of it.
I think in the last, for the ESC project that I'm managing right now, we have multiple streams, we have about 80 people working on this thing. So it's a compliance project.
Yeah.
You have your public companies. So one of the challenges is that, so I've built a rapport with the team that they feel comfortable coming to me,
Yes.
but I'm not their manager.
That's
Good job.
So that's the Scrum Master
That's the
role.
proper dynamic, I
Yeah.
It's
think.
very important.
That you are a Scrum Master, right?
Relationship is very important.
You're a Scrum Master?
No, he's the manager.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
And the product owner, I also have to keep the product owner happy. So I have to put enough pressure on the team so they still deliver the features. You should not get too compliant that, oh, if I say no, I'm gonna accept it. But I also have to make sure that there's enough balance between the product owner and the team.
But it's also to build a culture within the team so that the team is
Yes.
self-policing, or if you want to say, like they should be motivating each other and
You
motivating
have to
themselves.
facilitate continuous improvement, so you should be identifying, they're gonna go through stages, and you should be identifying ways to facilitate their growth, like things that they can improve on.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like now, because we're in a good cycle now, is I can tell anybody to lead a Scrum call and they're fine.
Awesome.
Like, they're just
You're working
like,
yourself
okay.
out of a job.
Like,
There you
good
go.
job. I'm gonna say, I'm like, oh my god. And then I was driving with traffic. I just called a QA person in India, and she liked the call. She's like, oh, nice. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's
hey,
awesome.
can you leave the call? I can't really do it. It's like, yeah, I'll just do it. Like, it's
Yeah.
that. Once you do that, then you've done well in your job.
Yeah, don't tell anybody that
Yeah.
you got that though.
Yeah.
Just keep that one.
I'd like to say that a good Scrum Master is necessary. A great Scrum Master is unnecessary but wanted.
Mhm. That's great.
Oh, that's
That's
nice.
nice.
That's
Good
nice.
teacher.
The product owner into all the Scrum calls, like or daily Scrum every day, or
I think that the best dynamic is to not do that, because if they're in every single meeting, they're going to think they have to be in every single meeting, and they're going to be more controlling. They're going to have a tendency to think that this team doesn't function without me. And the best way to create a great dynamic is to prove to the product owner, this team can easily function without you. You just give us the priorities and we'll get there for you.
Yeah, but what are they going to do with the rest of their? I mean, come on, the product owner's just hanging out.
No, they should be thinking about the forward thinking, think about what's
Talking to
going
clients out in
Sorry.
the market.
What do you say?
So they should be talking to clients.
Exactly,
Out in the
exactly.
market,
That's
solving
right.
problems.
Joel?
do something longer than a 5-minute answer.
No.
We should probably wrap it up then. Because I can see, right, we don't, do we have 5 minutes or no?
Sure, 5 minutes.
Okay, can we do a 5?
You need to hear more from Reena.
Asking the question.
These guys have said like one thing.
Yeah, got it.
So, we talked a lot about teams, as if teams are kind of the center of everything.
You are at an Atlassian event.
They are.
You know the Atlassian slogan, right?
I do.
Okay.
What's that?
We believe the teams are the cornerstone of every great human achievement.
Great.
So, how have you and your organizations helped the product function to jump the gap between we build non-agile roadmaps and non-agile requests to something that teams can consume as agile work?
I think on the roadmap, by the time it gets to the teams, they're breaking larger pieces of work into stories, and it's business as usual, using the, planning and grooming and so on and so forth. I think the end result is the quality of the product. That's like my number one, we're talking about metrics,
We have spent too much time at the program level, but when you're talking about teams of teams, it seems like at that layer, product management in general isn't used to this idea of creating things that are swappable at the epic side.
Reena?
Maybe I'm not asking a question, right?
No. I think more at a tactical level to deal and with that product mentality. One of the things we did 5 years ago when we kind of embraced Agile and we said we'll do it this way was to take the whole team to the training at the same time. So who was nominated as a product owner came with us to that training. So all the basics were learned at the same time, and the process was formulated that way.
Were they revved up?
They were revved up. That really helped. But then we came back, one of the Scrum trainings that we did, it actually offered us a framework of organizing the whole roadmap into program and projects, and it kind of resonated to how Jira could be organized as well, just the flexibility of all the tools that it offered. And then came in the organizational behavior issues that you were referring to earlier, the culture and everything, right? And how the people aspect is not always considered when one team is focused on adopting one way of doing things. So for us at Harvard, like I said, there's a thing we say, every tub is on its own bottom. So they get, every school, every department kind of gets to make their own decisions. And there comes in the dissimilarity in all the metrics and things that everybody's looking for. So how do you tie everything together, right? And then you have to look for something that's a common driver at a school level and figure out how do we tie those metrics across the different tools and people and processes and so on. So the last thing I wanted to say was something that will tie is your vision, whether it is a product or what you believe, low tolerance to defects, for example. That is where I think you have to zone in and kind of figure out and draw out the metrics and the processes from that level.
Just to clarify, that wasn't a metrics question.
No, and I was actually also referring to some of the other conversations happening too, and the previous question where the question was really how do we kind of tie or bring significance around product owner role and how there's no influence for the Scrum Master. Traditionally, it kind of aligns to the project manager role, right? Where project manager also doesn't have any influence over anything, but they have to get things done, right? So here, Scrum Master is that servant leadership comes in, where they are the proponent of the team. However, the product owner is who that comes in with a good understanding of what the product is, what the priorities are, and that's where you should have. So hopefully that resonates to everybody in the room here, that all ties in together.
The vision aspect, like what we haven't talked about at all today, is where are we going? What are we going to? If everybody has a clear picture, so you mentioned the man on the moon, right? You could, back in the day, you could go to a janitor at NASA and ask them, what do you do here? That janitor would tell you, I'm putting a man on the moon. Because by that janitor doing their job right and emptying the waste baskets and making the spaces clean, he's getting the scientists a place to work. He's getting them in he's contributing towards that guy on the moon. If we don't know what we're driving towards, if that's not clearly communicated and it's not embodied in leadership down, what's the point? Let's game the system at that point.
Great.
That's right.
Let's have some fun.
So sorry about
And
that.
pizza.
I don't know, if you could repeat the question, maybe it'll refresh everybody's memory for us.
Well, if I can just contribute to maybe, one of the things I've seen program managers have a hard time understanding is how at the story level it's going to add up to what they want. And just going back to the epic layer, it's a very important communication layer so they can understand that there's 30 stories, but it's going to basically add up to this thing, and half of them are done.
I guess what I was looking at was getting people to think about packaging of ethics in an agile way, as opposed to just functional decomposition. This thing is going to take 3 months, and that's all about it.
And that's the crux of the problem.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So try to get the product manager.
So I think it's how, for me, it's been how I ask the question, and I can't stress enough what has worked for me is what kinds of things do we need to do? Go to the text and ask them that and get your epic layer.
And with that, I think we need to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Shane, does Shane have any closing words?
Oh, yeah.
So he says wrap it up, and then I'm supposed to say something else.
That was I am not the moderator, so you don't have to listen to me.
Closing words.
Yeah. Anybody? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Let's party.